That, yeah, not good. That's what my ex-husband died probably did last, like, 6 months.
That was, yeah,
Yeah.
it's one that you don't catch till it doesn't show up until it's. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning to those watching.
I have an extra book. Everybody, anybody want a book?
Yeah, we've got another one in the room too, so.
Does Gordon want his own today and I have to share with you?
Sorry.
I'll get it around, sure.
And you're so looking forward to it.
Welcome, everybody. I will start by saying that Darren was disappointed he couldn't be here. He said something to the effect of, I wanted to watch when people started, making a bonfire for you. But I don't think it's that.
I don't think.
So here's the deal. Well, you're not supposed to. So this is the, you're not, this is the, so, okay. There's gonna be a lot in this chapter that's gonna wanna draw us into some debates, all right? I'm gonna ask that you all fight that impulse just a little bit. Because, we wanna get into evolution, we wanna get into all these different things, but for now. What this is doing, this first chapter, it goes along with the second chapter too. It's giving his personal background, right? So at this point, I don't wanna get into the creation versus evolution debates. We can get into it a little bit, but I don't wanna get too distracted by it. Because I haven't had a chance to read it.
I read chapter 1 or 2. I read chapter 2.
Chapter 1, because last week was just the introduction.
Oh, okay. So I'll save my hate for that.
Okay. So, well, one and 2 have both got a lot of stuff to talk about in. But this is the beginning of a journey and a conversation that he himself went on, and we're along for the ride. So, since this is almost like a testimonial, and I know that it comes across as though, the bigger national conversation, we talked about this last week, is that science versus religion, right? That they're incompatible. You have one or the other. So he's setting that kind of national tone. But in the end, he's good with having science and religion together. He is both a professor of science and an ordained minister. So by the end of this, we're going to find how he not just balances them, but integrates them. But for now, he's setting up his own journey where he went from, challenged with all this new science that was coming out in the day, and the Time Life magazine and book collection that he had, right? We're going to get into all of that and see how he went away from faith. Chapter 2 gets him kind of more comfortable with religion again, and then we move forward from there. So this is an invitation into his story. I want it to be more about our relationship with his story than getting stuck into the debates. We'll have plenty of time to get into the debates later.
We're gonna go to Starbucks, if that's okay.
Sure, enjoy. Lucky.
Gonna give you more.
That teach the children not to abandon their sister. I said, "Did you abandon your sister?" She said, "No, they abandoned me."
No, they have football game Friday night till 10 and a murder mystery birthday party yesterday till late. Yes. So anyway, so chapter 1 is kind of the crux of his crisis of faith. He says, is this what love looks like? And I do want to keep reminding everybody that eventually we're going to get deep into the book of Job. So just keep in mind that a lot of the themes that are brought up in this chapter really do parallel some of the uncomfortableness that Job brings up. When you look at the vastness, God's reply to Job is, look at the vastness of creation. And that's me. So part of what he's just hitting here is he's being confronted with just this huge timeline of history and planetary development and evolutionary ideas, and so he's being hit with all of this, and it leaves him going, is this what love looks like? So just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind that this is going to parallel some of the book of Job, and the book of Job is what helps him kind of reconcile all of this too. So we're gonna start with this paragraph 1, page or chapter 1, page 1. I think this is kind of a bold beginning, right? So he says, I was talking on the telephone in a dark room when I realized for the first time that Adam and Eve had not been actual people. Now, some people at this point might be throwing their books out the window. So bear with it. I was 12 or 13. With one hand, I held the receiver, we remember these, and with the other, I spun the long helical cord like a jump rope, its far end lost in the light, spilling in under the door to the kitchen. On the other side, activity and sound. Mom preparing supper, my siblings' voices. I suppose my presence was betrayed to them only by the to and fro motion of the cord under the door. Strangely, I don't remember the conversation or who was on the line, but as I stood there talking in the dark, I just knew it. The first couple were figurative. That's how this starts. And then we get his encounter with Time Life books and the series that covered all the different scientific realms. And he going with his dad, looking over this geologic timeline, all the different funky names of the timeline, and finding where our little sliver on the timeline was, right at the top. And so much had come before us. Okay, so he's hit and he's going through where things showed up, and multicellular life didn't even show up until 1 billion years ago, and all these different dates. And he says, I have my notes right here. Page 2. Yep. So he says, I was stupefied. The timeline, this is page 2, first full paragraph. I was stupefied. The timeline seemed a thing of great elegance. The words, Ordovician, Silurian, Eocene, were themselves discoveries, whatever they meant. Looking over the edge of time's precipice thrilled me. I carried the Time Life book to bed at night and pressed the structure of the past into the soft clay of my young mind, inventing mnemonics for the periods and epochs and rehearsing them to myself until I fell asleep. It was fun. So right away, this isn't not your typical kid, right? He's into this discovery in science. But it was also secretly scary. Okay. And he says all of this really happened. The thought I was nothing. The thought of life and death spread over such an unfathomable span of time without a single human witness was hard to accept. In the face of this, what was I? What was my life? And the lives of those I loved? Why were we here now after all of this? Made me feel like a ghost. Sometimes as an adult, I have felt the same way, usually during seasons of stress. When it happens, I almost always remember the time. And yet, he also was given a Bible, was taken to church. He learned about Adam and Eve, the 6 days of creation. But when he looks at the Time Life books, they're not there. So if we're Adam and Eve the first people, if they weren't, who were? The book didn't say. Equally disconcerting was the Bible's silence regarding trilobites and stegosaurs. On which day were these created? On which day did they disappear? And why did God let them die? So that's the opening, is he has this crisis of existence, not just of faith, but of his own importance in the grand scheme of things at the tender age of 12 or 13. So, first off, just initial thoughts and reactions to just this opening story. Him being hit with this idea that Adam and Eve were figures.
I think it happens to a lot of us, when you go to Sunday school, when you're little and you hear these stories, and then as you get older, you go, wait, this really probably couldn't happen this way,
They get a lot of that in college too. It known by, classes that they take that prove, evolution, and then they, even if they were brought up in church to try to figure it out, it's hard to figure out. And they don't have any support in college.
Yeah. I'll put a plug in there. That's part of our mission support of campus ministry, right? On all the as many different colleges.
we had, every denomination had
Yeah.
a house, and most of the local churches would come pick us up and take us to church on Sunday. So even though it was a state college, we had religious support.
Yeah, and that's harder now because the funding isn't as much there. People aren't just going up and doing that. So that's my plug to support campus ministry through our mission support. But that's kind of one of the goals of college, right? Is to make you think and to make you not just know what you think, but know why you think what you think. And not that they want to tear it all down, but they want you to be able to not bend it, but put words to it. Well, why do I believe these things? That's critical thinking. That's what life will teach you no matter what. Is you gotta, you know, they call it the school of life, but college especially is trying to.
Well, I think I told you the Creation Museum, which is obviously religious based.
Yeah.
Both sides story, every picture.
Yeah, I think they're trying to persuade it though.
Okay,
Yeah.
but they do tell both sides.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's hard when your deep beliefs are challenged. And what do you do with it? Especially if you don't have support around you.
They get into him pretty heavy in here, by the way.
Or do they?
Yeah, they really heavy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
they really get heavy with him.
eventually, yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's not a fan.
no, no, no.
Have you ever felt insignificant in the grand scheme of things? Like you did?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay, want to say more about that?
Well, just my personal experience of growing up the way I grew up, wasn't a fun life.
Mhm.
So I thought, well, you know, if the theory about God's with you every second of the day and knows what you're gonna be doing and everything, and I thought to myself, if that's the case, I don't have nothing to do with him because he's a son of God.
I'm guessing you just self-edited there.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I had quite a bit actually. But, you know, you think about what I was with, I said, if that is the case, he's got a rotten sense of humor.
I remember you saying that.
And I can't believe that. If I did, I would not like him if I believed that, believed that he was with me and there was a reason that he put me through that.
Yeah.
You're never ever gonna get me to think that, because if I did, I won't be a Christian anymore.
Sure.
So,
And he touches on that less on a personal level and more on a
yeah.
scale, yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
that religious, but I remember when I went off to college, I'd gone to a high school that there were 40 some in my class. And then I go to a state university and you walk in as
Oh,
a
sure.
freshman, you know, there's like 300 in all these lecture classes and it was, you know, I was used to not having to really study. And,
Sure. Were you the big fish in your small pond?
well, I
A
played
big
sports
fish?
and I was in most club, yeah. I was,
All of a sudden.
You're one of them.
all of a sudden I'm
Yeah.
down here.
You were one of them, yeah. The highest point in your life was high school, you know. Some people, I mean, there were some people.
I think that's why I finally joined a sorority my second year.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of sororities get bad press, but they give you a little.
I was in a fraternity. I have
They
no
give
feet.
you a group of friends if you're in a
Oh, yeah.
big school.
Yeah, half my wedding, half my groomsmen were from my fraternity. Okay, for me, I know pastors have a certain amount of, you know, Messiah complex that they have to be aware of. I think that's pretty normal, because we get all this training and you go and you help people. But there are days where, whether it's on a very local level or just looking at the problems of the world, I will just sometimes feel like, you know, well, I think I'm not alone in saying this, that a lot of clergy will hit those depressed times where they're like, well, what's the point? What difference am I making? Maybe some Christians feel that way too in general. But I know it's particularly, pastors are particularly prone to it because you're trying to have an impact. Some days it doesn't feel like you are. I know the Spirit is working with me through. But just to say that we can have those feelings of insignificance.
The age 12 to 13,
Oh, sure.
when I was 12 and 13, I was in confirmation class. Nobody else in my little town of Sandston, Virginia, had confirmation class.
They didn't even know what it was.
But no, I didn't know, I didn't hear anything from people who were Catholic, but we had Baptists and Presbyterians and Methodists, and they weren't talking about it. Now, I know that the Presbyterians and the Methodists do something,
Yeah, they-
but at that point, I didn't know what or when.
Sure.
And all the girls would have sleepovers on Friday nights, and I had to get up early and get breakfast from my mama. And my aunt would pick me up and take me in town to confirmation class. And I was mad because all the girls got to stay and have fun.
Yeah.
I did not, although I love my confirmation classes. So I began to feel like the low person, you know, about different things. It really didn't matter in the long run. because, confirmation class was wonderful. We had a large class, well, large. There were 14 of us, and, we all went to different high schools. First English was the Lutheran church in the city. Yeah, Epiphany was just forming, and, so people came from all areas, and we were all very different, but we all found common ground and were friends. And by the time we got to high school, sometimes on Friday nights, instead of going to a football game, we'd meet downtown or someplace in town and go bowling or go see a movie or something, just all of us together.
When you're 12 or 13, you're hitting that age and where you're trying to figure out who you are, you know, how many coming of age books and movies are about somebody around that age.
Right.
Because you're at that growing up stage where you're trying to figure out where you fit, who you are. And so, yeah, that's why you find you're trying to start a youth group or things like that, so they have that community. But yeah, it makes sense that I'm glad you brought up the age. It makes sense that he's having these big questions at that age. That's the common sense. There's a line he used in that last paragraph that really hits me. He said, the one on page 2. He carried the time lamp book to bed at night and pressed the structure of the past into the soft clay of my young mind. So here's my other question. How soft is your clay?
Not anymore. It's
Yeah.
solidified now.
I think that our clay, the clay of our minds, goes through stages. It's more soft or more open to having things impressed upon it or not. So just as a snapshot of today, how soft is your clay, do you think? How malleable are you?
More like bush.
You got a slurry going on over there.
I suggest the opposite. The moisture is left mine. It's gotten pretty much set in my ways. I'm pretty much, you're not gonna change my concepts too much. You might rough the edges a bit, but you're not gonna really change.
Okay.
How I think of things, because I've got too many years of trial and error behind me to say otherwise, so.
Sure.
Pretty much, yeah, you might rough the edges, but the basic concept is pretty much solidified.
Well, I think part of what will go on with this book is that it is an attempt to impress some things in your clay. So we'll see how it goes. You might again say just throw it out the window by the end of it, but I hope that as we go through the journey, there'll be some.
No, you can rough the edges with it, and the major cores pretty much where it's at.
Well, we'll see what we can do.
And I think our children do that to us sometimes.
Yes, they do. They force you to deal with things that you might not otherwise want to deal with. All right, moving on. Page 3, last paragraph. So now he's in church and they have a different graphic, not the timeline of the geological eras, but they have a different kind of timeline. A poster across the top, it read the plan of the end. Okay. So full color flow chart of the future based on the books of Daniel and Revelation. It was divided into 3 main sections: the church age, you are here; the tribulation, 7 years; and the kingdom age, 1,000 years. The rapture and the second coming demarked these segments. Featured prominently was the binding and loosing of Satan, and something about judgment seats and bowls. Armageddon was in there somewhere, and biblical citations were scattered throughout. The Old Testament saints, New Testament saints, the unsaved of all the ages, the beast, and the false prophet were all major players, and was, of course, the Lamb himself, Jesus Christ. Arrows indicated who would go where and when. All the arrows, if faithfully traced, led to one of 2 terminal stations: the new heaven and new earth in the upper right, or the lake of fire in the lower right. Have you ever seen a poster or a timeline like that?
I've never been someone in a Lutheran church.
No, not a religion. I know not everybody has a Lutheran background.
Well, this guy's Baptist, come back.
He grew up Baptist. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this one.
So yeah, Baptist, Pentecostal,
Yeah,
Assemblies of God, Seventh-day Adventists, more Pentecostal. Yeah, what was it called? the revival, you know.
Yeah, I've been accustomed to hearing about it, but we never did it in church, but yeah.
I think if you tune into certain radio stations, it's
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Big
I
time.
read the whole series, the Left Behind series,
Oh, yeah.
which was supposed to be,
The millennium.
you know, an interpretation of Revelation.
Yeah.
And, that had a lot of those types of themes on it,
Yes.
it really.
Or you'll see the signs of people with bumper stickers, in case of rapture, this car will be a
Which-
fan.
Yeah, tapping into what you're saying, Roger, I just can't wrap my head around the concept of God just
No,
rapturing people out of cars and planes, and letting things crash.
Yeah, no,
I have a hard time.
yeah,
Okay, so,
a whole hard time, with the whole thing.
yeah, so here's a different timeline that he was exposed to. And he goes and talks to his dad, the next bit here. I was intrigued, but there were a lot of incongruities. Chief among them was the fact that Dad knew a lot, but he had never mentioned the rapture or the lake of fire. If something so terrible was true, surely he would have briefed us. One day I found him at his desk and asked him about it. He looked up from his work and said, "Son, that's not true." I wish his dad would have given him a fuller answer. He would have spared his kid a lot of angst. And then he gets into Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan, you know, wrote Cosmos. He had a TV show. I remember in high school, our teacher would still have on the schedule, he would write multimedia extravaganza. And it was basically, we're watching a video. We watched some Carl Sagan, and fascinating guy. And,
Love
you know,
his accent.
oh yeah. Billions. And so he put,
Billions and billions.
he talks about this Carl Sagan image of what the last perfect day before the sun, billions of years from now, eventually supernovas, and our planet is long since dead. And that he believed, because apparently his young mind was attuned more to science and proof and facts, and could this be proved, and here's the proof, and all of this. So then, looking at page 5, the middle paragraph there. At the time, I had a pretty simple idea of God. Like many Baptist children, I got on my knees and prayed at bedtime, sometimes with my parents, sometimes alone. I talked to God and God listened. God talked to me and I listened to him. Straightforward. I like that. But this new information challenged this. God became both more and less than I had thought. More because of the practically infinite amount of space and time and out there, places and times no human could visit, and creatures no human could know. And God was the God of all that too, of archaeopteryx and bacteria and galaxies and planets, and God only knew what else. Less because it was hard to see how, with a past so remote and a future so bleak, God could care very much about me. I pictured God like a balloon, expanding without end to contain all things. And the more the balloon expanded, the more it seemed to fade. God is so big. What does God have to do with me? And then it just,
And reading this, it was like watching my timeline.
yeah.
I told my wife that.
Yeah. And you know, not that this science wasn't around, but in the 60s and 70s, timeline books, Carl Sagan, you know, science shows, you know, PBS, Mutual of Omaha, you name it. All this stuff was becoming like popular, right? When did the magazine Popular Science start? The National Geographic's been around since the 1800s, but you know, you get the color photography, you get all the stuff starting to hit, and things become a little more real. They got to be more commonplace. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know it's before my time, 60s and 70s, but you know, I had all those books and stuff still sitting in my house when I was a kid. So just as a comparison, you know, he wasn't the only one to think this. So I want to read to you Psalm 8. I can read it if you want to grab a Bible and follow along. You can, but it's not that long of a psalm. Psalm 8. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouths of babes and infants, you have founded a bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? Yet you have made them a little lower than God, or in some translations than the angels, and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet. all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. So even without electron microscopes and far-reaching telescopes and paleontology and geology, the ancient people of the Bible and the Psalms recognized the same thing. They could see the wonders of creation around them, God's, the work of God's fingers, and still feel that same wonder. Theirs is a little more wonder, a little less despair. Of what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them, and yet you made us a little lower than God. So this feeling of smallness.
And there he talks about people having dominion over animals, and that's a bit different. He states it a little differently.
Big time different.
Yes, and that's another, we'll get to that, that's another of his kind of cognitive dissonance. Well, if humans are supposed to be the height of creation, have dominion over all creation, then how does that track? But just as some perspective, he's not alone in that feeling of smallness, but different takeaway in the psalm, wonder and majesty of God, as opposed to what's the point of it all, and God getting so big that maybe we have more air to pump into the balloon now, more information.
I think one of the problems we have in Christianity or religion in general is that, if I can use the term evolved,
Sure.
we haven't evolved along with science. So consequently, we're still, science is evolving all the time, changing. For instance, the Big Bang Theory now has been smashed because of the new telescope says that the Big Bang was, they can still see full galaxies beyond that. So that's ruined that theory. So evolution is a religion just as anything else is, but it evolves. Well, Christianity or religion in general hasn't.
Well, yeah, whatever's going on with science, they'll take in new information, even if it challenges the established stuff, and they'll try to figure out how it fits, if they have to redo things, if it can incorporate. But yeah, religion has notoriously, especially Christianity,
One of our problems
has notoriously been against,
as we should.
growth. Sometimes, if you look at the Inquisition, if you look at certain periods of church history, we're not always open to reform. New things. Yeah.
Yeah, these are big questions.
Yeah. But it comes down to God is so big, why would God care about little us? That kind of is the gist. All right. Now we get into evolution. Page 6. Let's see. Last paragraph. The cause may be a simple. Okay. He was talking about the article with Richard Leakey and Homo habilis, like one of these, predecessors. He mentions the poster, right? The famous poster, sticker of, the progressive evolution going up. And I always thought that has done that theory of evolution great disservice, because it was never supposed to be a straight line. It was supposed to be branches, splitting, and things like that. Anyway, that's harder to put on a bumper sticker. So he had this really deep, intense reaction to Homo habilis, right? How could I be related to this? And so he says, the cause may be a simple combination of ignorance and garden variety trepidation. We arrive on Earth without knowing very much about the world, and we grow and learn in severely limited contexts. Cautious by nature, we stick with what works. Our neighborhoods, our systems of education and government, our beliefs about ourselves and other people, our habits. I once read a story about a little boy who had been invited to eat with a neighborhood friend. It was his first meal outside his own house. He noticed the silverware was somehow different than what he had at home. He was put out. These aren't real forks, he announced. Can I go home and get mine? A whole range of parochialisms need to be shed as we grow, and sometimes it hurts to lose. Doesn't mean they're wrong or bad, just as you grow, it hurts to lose the old stuff. So maybe cosmic time and Leakey's hominid were just my early and difficult introductions to a larger world. But for me, at least, the problem had another dimension. I, like everyone, was born and raised to hold a certain set of beliefs. But the fact of my belief was only part of the problem. There was, in addition, the content of my belief. I had several months before meeting Homo habilis, and in the language of the moment, accepted Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior. I was a newly baptized Christian, still wet behind the ears. The cosmos was shaking me up. I guess we weren't quite done. Any thoughts on that?
Why did Adam and Eve have to look like us?
Right.
I mean, everything is still good.
Yeah.
But nobody says it had to look like us.
One of the things.
Right, and we actually know that they didn't look just like us, you know.
One of the things that always bothered me was
Man is very different.
when they left the Garden of Eden and there was other people.
Right?
So
Yeah,
that always said, wait a minute, where'd they come from?
Yeah,
You know?
Cain and Abel, where did he find his wife?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was always a shock.
Yeah,
to
was it
me.
the land of
Can't remember now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. So there were more people than them. So.
yeah. So I mean, yeah, we don't need to get into that. We could. What's to say that, you know, this is a terrible example, so just forgive me in advance, but who's read or seen 2001, A Space Odyssey?
I'm pretty sure about
Okay, there's that famous scene where their monolith is there that
Yeah.
the alien put on, and it's teaching the chimpanzees or whatever, you know, they are, you know, they start to figure things out, right? So that's, I hate that. I like the book, but there's parts about it that, but in a sense, at some point, some big adaptation happens where whatever our ancestors were, Adam and Eve, Homo habilis, whatever you want to call them, reach some new level of awareness, right? Some new level of intelligence, awareness, self-awareness. Maybe that's happening. That big jump, that first, not a light bulb, those weren't invented yet, but that first, you know,
right.
realization of something else, of being created, of knowing who you are, that you're part of something bigger. Who's to say? But again, I always go back to with Genesis, with the creation, the who is more important than the how. If you start trying to figure out all the details, you're gonna pretty soon find yourself in the land of Ur, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And be like, wait a minute, where'd they come from? But if you're trying to come at it with a sense of who God is, who God made us to be, our relationship, that's a different kind of truth.
One of the conflicts between religion and I think the natural is that in religion everything is spontaneous. In other words, it is, and in natural it evolves. It takes a long time. For instance, it wasn't like you were saying a spark, and all of a sudden humans were humans. In the realm of natural causes, it takes a long time to get to that point. And so there's where one of the discrepancies between the two, and they can't come together, is because one is a faster timeline.
Yeah.
And the other one is not. And it's hard for some people that were raised in the church in the 40s and the 50s.
Or just in a more
Or even,
strict
yeah, right, yeah,
interpretation.
it's hard to understand it.
And I don't understand.
You mean Michelangelo was wrong?
Yeah, and I think part of the gift of our, let's say, finitude is that we don't know it all. And that can be hard to recognize as a gift. But it kind of is, I think, intended to help you let go of thinking you have any kind of ultimate control over everything. And he even said, where is God is so big? All these times and places and creatures that are known only to God, no humans ever see. It shakes your, well, we get into this and then it shakes your feeling that you're the center of the universe. Which is a nice feeling, to be the center of the universe. Yeah.
He never says he was an agnostic, but it basically sounds like one early on. When he walked away from the church, he's pretty much agnostic at that point. Sounds.
Yeah, I think agnostic, which is Greek for basically
No, there's no proof either
I
way.
don't know,
Yeah,
no knowledge.
Yeah.
Is different than an atheist, which is.
right, yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
there's
that's
no
good.
proof there was or isn't.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I'm down with agnostics. Who are like, oh, like I can live with a shrug or like a
Right.
open.
yeah.
Or a question.
Yeah.
I'm reading another book right now called The Five Understandings. A friend of mine is literally dying right now. She's been sick for years and years and years, and she's decided not to try to. There's nothing for her. So she shares with me. And one of its themes kind of overlaps with this, and so I'm thinking, as I'm reading this, I'm like, wait a minute, that must be the other one. But I've only started, I'm only in reading the first understanding so far, but the main thing is a common kind of a phrase or cliche. The only thing that you can really rely upon is change. And that's kind of what we're talking about here too. Infinitesimal little changes over millennia have brought us to this moment. And I think it disconcerts me about living now is how rapid change is. You know, how things have changed so much. My mother-in-law called this morning, my father-in-law had to have a skin graft. They live in southern Ontario. Well, the Ontario health system's been hacked and is being held ransom.
Oh my gosh.
And my father-in-law, I mean, fortunately, this is not like threatening, right? But think of, for the people that's all of southern Ontario, southwest Ontario, their records are being held. So like my father-in-law's appointment's been canceled and canceled and canceled. And I'm thinking to myself, I should go away from paper. You know what I mean? But it's like, there's not really a backup here, guys.
They should have a backup plan.
Exactly, and these bad actors in the world
Yeah, take it in.
are taking advantage, and they change our behavior then, right? So, you know, somebody will come up with something else, but it exhausts
Yeah, I mean, how,
me. It exhausts me.
everybody's got used to taking their shoes off at the airport.
Yeah, that's right.
One over one thing. So who knows who Stephen A. Smith is? Does anybody know who that name, Stephen A. Smith?
I've heard it, but
No.
there was a Stephen Smith who was an educator who had over it. No, he wasn't that one. Rest school. Here's school.
Okay, does anybody watch ESPN?
No,
No.
Sometimes,
So-
like, when I walk through the room, I'm like,
There you go. So I don't watch nearly as much sports as I used to, as kids in life, but I still want to keep up with it. So I've got an ESPN app, and every day I'll just scroll through the headlines. Who won what, who's doing well, you know, who got injured. And there's this guy named Stephen A. Smith, and he's the main talking head on ESPN. He's got a show with these other guys, and they just have these debates, and you can tell it's all not necessarily fake, but definitely inflated. Like, okay, you're gonna argue this side, you're gonna argue. Rah, rah, rah.
You see this one guy that does what?
Yeah.
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 I know who he is.
Yeah, him and Mad Dog, I don't know Mad Dog's last name. And so every morning there's, well, Stephen A. Smith says, the Giants are done for, like, there's this immediate, whatever small thing happened yesterday has to have complete meaning for the rest of the season, and I think we want that, we want, whatever we learn, we want it to mean something and change something. And really, it's very gradual and infinitesimal, who knows how it'll turn out.
and as a Baltimore Orioles fan,
That.
I tell you, we were talking about this last night, like, I can't tell you how deflating that was
Yeah,
for them,
it's-
but that's what happens. The Orioles this year, I've been an Orioles fan since I was a wee small child, and this year, I've been a fan through all the bad years.
Yeah.
I've been a devoted fan this year. They were doing so well. It looked like they and the Atlanta Braves were gonna be in the World Series.
Yeah.
They lost in
Yeah,
the division playoffs.
all my teams got swept.
And I'm like, and same, and Atlanta also, like, who won, the
Rangers.
The Rangers
Just never won a World Series with them, so yeah.
yes, exactly, but like all this season, I mean, I went to games and we watched the games and like you, I forget, and then done, you know.
It's done.
But on the other side of that, there were people going, yay, my team, you know, so, I don't know, yin and yang.
Racing, it's about the same way.
Yeah, it's like, and it's like a fall that, you know, it's
Yeah.
like, it has to end at some point in time, you know.
Or you watch all the ex-nationals playing on a winning team.
Oh, right.
They were
Yeah.
national together with everybody,
Yeah.
everybody who's in good.
Yeah, for a long time, I said
Yeah.
the Brewers were the farm team for the rest of
Yeah,
the league. But like the Commanders just did that. You get rid of Sweat and Chase Young, like, what did you do? Anyway,
So back to religion.
Yeah. But I mean, it shows the point, like, we want
right, we
things,
wanna know.
everything, this must mean something, this happened.
that's what I said earlier, you know. Or natural. Phenomenon takes a long time to do something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we as humans, we don't look in the abstract very well. We like concrete starting and ends.
Yeah.
So it's hard to fathom.
Yeah.
Some of the natural things that happen.
Again, remember, all of this is laying the groundwork for Joe, right? We want things to mean something, we want it to happen now. We don't necessarily get what we. So the next section is called an organ and a vacuum. Okay, so this is kind of the crux here. This is page 7. The cosmos, deep time, homo habilis, all of it, and all presented a stiff challenge to my nascent worldview. At the time, I didn't have the word for it, but I do now. Anthropocentric. In my understanding, humanity was the central feature of the cosmos. The word describes not only the rather conventional Protestantism of my upbringing, but Christianity as a whole. It, unlike many of the Eastern traditions, assigns us a pivotal cosmic role. We probably don't need convincing. Christianity says that human beings, and not other creatures, are made in the divine image. God protects Adam and Eve using the skins of dead animals. Did God have to kill them? God takes on human form and tells us we are more important than the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. And as Shane Claiborne likes to say, Scripture may begin with a garden, but it ends with a city. In short, God's love for us is the faith's central theme and the driving force behind Scripture and traditional life. Jesus came to save people. Now, theology, and you can see it in the Bible, that Jesus came to redeem all of creation. Paul says that all of creation is groaning, but it definitely focuses on people.
I'm having trouble getting Jesus into this.
Yeah.
Because it seems like, you know, in Job, God was kind of, I shouldn't get ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Seems like God was not giving him the justice that he thought he deserved.
Oh, yeah.
Big
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, Job is hard.
Yeah, it is. But then, geez, and so it seemed like he was saying that, okay, well, God doesn't pay attention to people, you know, people's needs. But here in the New Testament, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you, or, you know,
Weak and weary.
heavy laden."
Yeah.
And it seems to be
I don't
a
think it does.
friction there, right?
And so we need to read the Old Testament through our Christian understanding, and at the same time, we can't just wedge Jesus into something that we don't like. Like the temptation to preach on the Old Testament as a pastor would be like, well, Old Testament, and Jesus. You know, that's sort of like the hero swoops in at the last second.
Right.
We kind of have to sit with.
I saw it a little bit, I may be ahead of myself here too, but I saw something a little bit different, in what it was trying to say with Job, was that people of the time thought they were better than anything else, they were
If you
sovereign over everything in
yeah,
the
if you're
world.
prosperous, that means God is
And
blessing.
God was saying, nah, that's not true.
Yeah.
And he was proving a point, I think, is what he was trying to do.
Yeah, and is Job a parable? Or is it? What do you think, Job? Oh,
Don't
by the way,
bigger than what you are.
it wasn't us, it was not, it was the land of Nods.
Yeah.
Correction.
I was thinking of,
No, I couldn't.
I was thinking of Abram,
I was thinking of a fairy tale.
Right?
You know what I mean? Yeah.
yeah, it's probably where they got it, anyway.
So sacrificial people, but I mean, does that really go to
Yeah, I mean, that movie is brought into question. I don't know, that's a whole other thing too. Where does the recreation fit into this? You know,
They're spirits, you know, yes, like because dogs have spirits. They do.
but then, you know,
They might.
as much as the New Testament talks about soul and body, because Paul uses that rhetorically,
Mhm.
the resurrection, despite popular conventional wisdom, is bodily, right? We don't know if it's our youngest body, our most prime body, if it's, you know, the body you had when you died. What about cremation? What about folks who drowned? You know, all these questions we don't have answers to. But there's the promise of a bodily resurrection. We don't know what that will be. But this, you know, that the soul is not the thing that flits up to heaven. Right? Our bodies are still part of this. Creation is good, right? Jesus became incarnate. There's the flesh is redeemed, not just the soul. So that's do animals have spirits? Do we have spirits or souls? Whatever you want to call it, sure. But we can't divorce that from the bodies that we were created in either. So that's a whole nother. What does that mean? Because it would be very easy to say, well, what does any of this matter? All this fleshly stuff, because we're just going to be spirits in heaven. That gives people a really easy way to then just say, like, well, it doesn't matter how I take care of myself. It doesn't matter that you know, our church, why would our church sponsor litter pickup? It doesn't matter. All of this is going to pass away, right? Rapture, clear it all out. So you got to be careful with that idea that our souls are completely separate from our bodies, because that can lead you down the road of None of this is important. Right. Yeah. All right, so vacuum in an organ. Accordingly, the non-human cosmos is not the central object of God's concern. We're on page 8. Is it true that God made the cosmos and called it good? Or it is true that God made the cosmos and called it good. It is true that all traditional creeds begin by proclaiming God as creator. It is true that in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, God entered the cosmos. Cosmos is the Greek word for like the whole created world. But in all this, the cosmos itself is only a backdrop to the real drama, a drama with only two players, God and humanity. Christianity, in sort, is not only anthropocentric, it is irreducibly so. Perhaps that is how it should be. Perhaps the details of the cosmos don't matter in the end. It has been argued, sometimes by the most eminent of theologians, that religion and science are such different things that they really don't belong in the same room. Perhaps comparing them is like comparing, in the words of Karl Barth, an organ and a vacuum cleaner. I wonder which was which for Barth. In this view, the anthropocentrism of Christianity is perfectly appropriate because Christianity is about non-human affairs, like quantum mechanics is about salvation. Not at all. Christianity, properly understood, is about human history and God's role in it. By the way, anthropo is from the Greek word for man. There is a certain appeal to this view. After all, we are subjects, not objects. We get to act. We have an impact on things. In the end, our concerns reduce to human ones. Therefore, Christianity, a solution to a human problem, is rightfully human-centric. Moreover, because human nature shapes whatever it touches, including science, we should know ourselves first. It is unavoidably so, and there is no evading. What does it mean to know ourselves? Whatever else we are creatures. Does not our history and our context as creatures matter? Can theology afford to insulate itself from science, which is, as the UK's Astronomer Royal, Martin Rees, puts it, the only truly global culture? Should my theology of creation, and therefore my entire theology, be sealed off from our best scientific understanding of creation, even when that understanding threatens to upend my theology?
Book I gave you was trying to bring science and Christianity or religion together.
Yeah.
And he says he could prove it, so I went, it's a little above my head, but it was
the case for Christ?
no.
No.
It's, yeah.
Do you know it?
I don't know, man.
Okay. It is.
So leaving is see.
Believing is seeing. A physicist explained how science shattered his atheism and revealed the necessity of faith. So yeah, I don't think it has to be either. But here he's struggling. Like,
I think it can't be.
if a lot of Christian teaching, right? If a lot of Christian teaching has focused so much on only humans, it's no wonder that Christianity, especially, is playing catch up in terms of a theology of ecology, a theology of creation. There's a lot of folks that are working on that right now. And when you look at other cultures that aren't based in European Roman Empire roots, when you look at folks in Southeast Asia, Africa, different parts, South America, Native Americans, they've got so much better connection to the creation around them, right? Of wanting to live in harmony with creation, of recognizing you're a part of a bigger system, as opposed to a lot of Christian theology, which was the doctrine of discovery, and if we found it, it's ours, right? Do with it what we want. No wonder Lake Erie was on fire for a while, right? But, we don't think about how our actions impact others if you think you're the center of the universe.
The Spanish Inquisition, where they moved into Mexico and South America, if you didn't become Christian, they broke your head.
Yeah.
So,
Real great evangelism.
it was great evangelism, yeah.
Do you get any of that study in seminary? Do they address science and religion and all of seminary?
A little bit. We're, at least in my seminary and Wartburg, I'm very proud of Wartburg. I'm very thankful to have gone there. One of the biggest things that they teach you right out of the gate, like your prologue week, right before you start your regular classes, to set the tone is about context. They send you out into the city of Dubuque and have you interview people and just get to know the town and the city and the history, One of the main places that delivers pizza is called the Shot Tower Restaurant.
Yep.
Because they made lead there, right? They had lead mines and they had the shot tower where they would drop it down and make the lead, right? So you get to know your context, and I think if Christianity, if Christians really want to share the good news with the world around them, then you actually have to pay attention to the world around you, not just people,
That's right.
but the whole creation, because where people live impact their lives. Right? If you live in the city versus the country, mountain versus the coastline, you have to know. Just even, why do we always talk about the weather? Because that affects everybody. So you have to be tuned into the world around you, including the scientific.
I grew up in that town, and
Yeah.
one of the things, lead, as everybody sees lead, they see this very dull looking gray thing. Well, actual lead looks more like coal in its original state. It's shiny and it's hard, and that, I mean, the core, the lead ore, I should
Yeah.
say. And one of the problems they had in the area was there's so many, the town became a lead mining town. That's why it was designed and built. A guy by the name of Julian Dubuque, that's his name, a Frenchman, and he's got a tower on over a bluff over top of the Mississippi.
Go visit it.
And so all the things sounds like French because it is part of the French Louisiana Purchase. But the funny thing about it was that all these lead mines were around and they were never ever written down. So somebody built a house, the next thing you know, it's in a hole.
Yeah.
Because the lead mine collapsed.
Yep.
They had people getting lost all the time walking, and lead mines are not coming back out, so it was one of those situations, but lead is everywhere. And he was talking about the shot tower, which was the Civil War shot tower, and it's still there.
They make bullets.
And just across the street is a brewery, so if you stop, think about that for a minute.
So I guess that would be my answer, would be, do they teach science? Not, they don't specifically get into the science versus religion thing. But like I said last week, I had a professor who had a whole class that took the cutting edge field of evolutionary psychology, trying to use evolutionary biology and science and behavioral patterns to explain why we do the things we do now. And tying that into biblical scholarship and biblical interpretation in ways that I can't replicate. Man, it's just magical. So we were open to all these conversations, but it was just kind of around in that sense of know your context. So be up on the news, be up on what's going on in science. What are we going to say as a church about artificial intelligence? That's moving so fast. What is that? I mean, I had a very good friend, a seminary classmate, who just posted last night that they were stuck on their sermon. They could just tell that something was missing. So a friend of theirs said, well, put it into Chat GPT. So she put it into Chat GPT, and that artificial intelligence turned their sermon into an outline. And then she was able to be like, oh, that was where the problem was. And I'm like, and some folks just for fun have said, hey, ChatGPT, here's some scripture, here's some teachings, write a sermon on this, and then they'll share it and be like, haha, isn't that funny? Like as a lark. But I'm like, what are we doing, folks?
I'm afraid that as we rely on artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And all these things that make everything easier, we're gonna lose ability. Well,
For ourselves.
Well, have you
and
ever
our
seen the movie
children, our next
Wall-E?
generation,
Just like the movie.
they're looking for the, they're looking for the quick fix for everything.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's always been.
We already don't remember all the phone numbers we used to.
That's right, that's right, exactly, you don't have to know the number, you just have to have it in your phone.
Yeah.
That thing, the
This-
bane of society is what.
Yeah, we outsource some of our memory.
It's safe in a box. I'm concerned.
Just like any other tool, it depends on how you use it.
Yeah.
I can do great things with this.
Yeah.
but, Anyway, let's get through the end. We're running out of time. This is probably one of the deeper chapters because he's laying all this stuff out there. So then he gets into the story of the toothpaste kid.
Yeah.
Which was just, those kinds of things are yet another trauma for this young guy in high school of seeing this toothpaste kitten, and again, just realizing, well, here's what I wrote down. I said, this was a very receptive, curious, and sensitive kid. So seeing this toothpaste kitten and saying, chance and random unpredictability in atoms and organisms, and putting that alongside the idea of providence, that God is guiding you, providing for you. And he just couldn't reconcile these two things.
Yeah, that's him.
If something like this toothpaste kitten, why would God allow it? Why would God allow a war? Why would God allow cancer or COVID or malaria, mosquitoes, poverty? Why would God allow it? Is it really up to us and it's our choices and God's just gonna sit back and go like, well, they messed it up again, let's try again? Why would God allow
Ray
this?
stopped by last night and they had a funeral yesterday for a tiny baby.
Yeah.
And if, I know it affected it, and just, you just don't know why.
The hardest funeral I've ever done was for a fighter. I've only had to do that once. And that was.
And we're desensitized because 100, 200 years ago, that happened more often than
Right.
we can shake a stick at.
But
I mean, it was a common occurrence back then.
Yeah.
So now it's not, but
Yeah.
people live with that all the time, you'd have 6 kids and 3 of them died as a babies, so.
Well, I'm gonna have a lot more miscarriages.
yeah, and it still affected you, but like you say, it was.
Yeah, more common back then, so.
Well, page 11. First full paragraph there. All of this seemed to fly in the face of providence, the Orthodox Christian idea that God is somehow in control of everything, that divine guidance and care ultimately rule the cosmos. It may be argued that providence is not a scientific term, and no experiment or observation could in any sense disprove it. This point is well taken. Indeed, many theologians believe that God purposely directed and still directs evolution, including the big dinosaur extinction, toward an outcome that does include precisely us. Roman Catholic theology, for example, considers evolution to be a secondary cause through which God, the primary cause, has acted to bring about the current biological state of things. Sure. Sometimes theology of this kind is conflated with the notion that evolution is inherently progressive and inevitably builds finer and finer creatures. The broad appeal of this idea can be seen on the line of primates image that I talked about earlier. And it finally gets to us at last, we're the best. But evolution doesn't always work that way, right? Or the world around it changes, and then that animal is no longer adapted to being in that environment. But this conceit may be an artifact of our self-centeredness and the general optimism of a scientific age. It may not correspond to any innate progressive tendency of evolution itself. Evolution is a process, it's descriptive, it's not, it doesn't have will of its own, right? Biologists are split on this question, but let's be generous. Even if we are meant to be here, and even if God did use evolution to that end, God has made a strange and even troubling choice. Evolution is an inefficient choice. Only 1 in 1,000 species that have ever existed exist today. Is this really the free decision of an omnipotent God? Why so much trial and error? It's a drawn-out choice. Recorded human history is to cosmic time as 3 minutes is to 10 years. It's a brutal choice. That extinction event is one of 5 major global extinction events in Earth's history, and not nearly the largest. These extinctions exhibit no pattern in frequency, and no one knows what caused most of them. But we can be sure that during them, the level of animal suffering, significant in the best of times, was extremely high. This has gone on for billions of years. It's hard to believe that we are the reason for it. There is such a profound disharmony between natural history as we know it and any traditional meaning of divine care and guidance, that all efforts to bring them together seem to me to be mistaken at best and dishonest at worst. Is this really what love looks like? There's the title of the chapter. Is this really what love looks like? All the stuff, time life, the two-faced kitten, all these things come to this. Is this really what love looks like? It seems that things could be simpler, less wasteful, and more reflective of God's great and particular affection for us. If Christianity is true, there must be some kind of match between its message and the cosmos God has made. And maybe this is why some Christians are so hostile to science. Because if you follow science long enough, it might get you to a question like this. Is this really what it looks like? Is this really what it looks like? And so the last part is this falling alone, this nightmare that he has. So by the time he gets to college, the balloon and the knowledge has gotten so big that God has faded, religion has faded to pretty much nothing. And it's a bleak place to stop, but that is where we stop this week. And there is more to come next week as he gets back into religion in a different way.
So we're just gonna do chapter 2.
Yep. I think 1 chapter is enough at a time. There's a lot.
Yeah.
My final question. Just does any of this resonate with you more than what we've already talked about? And how does this chapter make you feel? And back to how soft is your play? So where are you at the end of this part of history?
Well, it basically justifies the way I've been thinking all my life, nobody, and up to this point, everyone thought I was all wet.
So you're like,
So it kind of justifies a little bit the way I felt
all right,
growing up. I mean, it parallels me completely.
yeah,
He and I are the same wavelength.
kind of the same club.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It makes me feel kind of sad, honestly, you know, and I've been struggling with these issues, these questions in general, like, you know, Mark and I were talking about something the other day, I was like, you know, our life is like a minute on the timeline. It's right, when you consider the billions of years, maybe a minute, you know, it's like, and we worry about so many things, and we think we really have an effect. And I wanna believe that being good and loving other people and all those things,
it
you
matters.
know, matter, and they do matter
It
in
does.
the here and now, but when you start thinking about, you know,
Sure.
everything else.
A good case in point, if you stop and think about it, people think about greenies, which is a basic religion. The green people, you know,
Oh.
sit in the highway and say stuff, all those, that is a religion, pretty much too. In a way that they believe certain things, well, they're talking about whether or not we're the cause of the global
Climate
warming or
change.
not,
Yeah.
which we ever affected. I think, again, in our arrogance, we add more to that than what we really are doing.
It's probably
And the
both,
reason
yeah.
I say that, look at World War II.
Yeah.
With all the ships that were sunk with the oil and the gas and everything that was put in the oceans, and what did Mother Nature do with it? Turn them into reefs, you know, so,
Sure.
and so I think we give ourselves a little too much credit, and I think that's even in our religion, we give ourselves a little too much credit.
Probably.
And so we're not the arrogance of the human being, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is kind of one of our biggest problems.
Well, that's,
We tend to think we do more, we have more control than we really got.
That's right.
so that's another thing to bookmark as we get,
Um,
not in the next chapter, but the one after, into the book of Job. And that's, you know, as weird as Job is compared to the rest of the Bible, I think that's precisely the reason why it's in.
And that's what Job's all about, is that you're putting yourself a little higher than you really are, and he's just knocking him down a few notches to
Yeah.
let him know that.
Well, we'll get into all that, let's close with a, I think it would be good to close with a prayer after all of this. Gracious God, thank you for this day. Thank you for your creation, for all its wonders, those we have come to grasp and those still beyond our reach. Thank you for your curiosity and for the vocation of scientists to explore and to understand. Help us as we struggle with some of the information we gather. Help us as some of the discoveries we make are unsettling. Help us as we wrestle like your servant Jacob, who you named Israel. Help us to wrestle and struggle with what you're trying to tell us and teach us. When we feel insignificant, remind us that you sent your son to us. And when we get too big for our britches, remind us that we are part of something bigger. And members of a body, creatures in creation, pieces of a whole. In all things, help us to turn to you, our source and our ground. Pray in Jesus' name. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for those at home.
We're gonna go through this on the chat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That way.
it's a lot.